Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Cycle Jerks Podcast. Today's guest is the great and powerful Rick Sutton, currently Director of Marketing at Enduro Bearings. Rick has worked with many top brands throughout his storied 35-year career in the bike industry, and of course, is the co-founder of the Sea Otter Classic. Rick, it is an honor to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Ah, good to be here.
Yeah,
Great way to
great.
start the week. Yeah.
Awesome. So we usually like to find out a little bit about how you got started with the bicycle. So can you go back to, growing up and what was your first experience with the bicycle?
Oh, first experience with the bicycle was a Schwinn Stingray. And I grew up in a motorcycling family. So the first event I ever entered, I think I was 9 or 10 years old. It was at Fremont Raceway. And there was a bicycle race for kids as halftime entertainment between the heats and the main events. My dad was racing. I don't know whether he's racing a BSA or a Triumph at the time, but anyway. And and so a bunch of us little snotty-nosed kids got on our bikes and rode around the TT course for 4 laps, and that was my first jump into the shallow end of the bike racing world.
Yeah, how many of us started with the Schwinn Stingray? Man, that was the gateway drug for
It
sure.
it
Yeah,
was.
exactly.
It definitely was. We lived adjacent. We lived on the corner of a cul-de-sac, and I just remember I don't know how many hours upon hours in a row. It wasn't like total hours over time. It wasn't cumulative. It was just straight hours popping wheelies on the cul-de-sac until the front end broke off. So
Yeah. Yeah, growing up, I had so many broken bicycles, and it was like a source of pride, as a kid, it's like there was a sense of like, hey, I broke this, but it wasn't that for my parents, that's for sure. Yeah. How about you, Chris? You have any broken bicycles in your past?
Yeah, I was not as fortunate. We had the Huffy, that's all my dad could afford. But
Yep.
that thing just like, I can remember just the chain rubbing on the chain guard. It's riding around.
Yep. I think my first bike was a Montgomery Ward. So yeah, and then we got the Stingray later, but
Yeah.
yeah,
Just,
good.
just that first experience of freedom, when you're that young, like Rick said, you can just be out there for hours and hours, just like pulling wheelies and jumping off curbs. And, you know, it's
Yeah,
great.
yeah,
yeah,
good
for
stuff.
sure. And then
So yeah, go
go
ahead.
ahead. Sorry. No.
No, no, I was just gonna say, so from the beginnings at the motorcycle track, did you continue on with bike racing, or where did it go from there?
Well, actually, as many in the industry, I mean, the list is long, 12 arms long, but I actually went into motorcycle racing and grew up at a point in time where the Bay Area and Santa Cruz was just loaded with great riders. So grew up racing, had a partial ride with the domestic importer for Mako, raced against, started very young. This is hilarious. My dad was, I've got some stories, but boy, does my dad have some stories.
Hmm.
So, he decided that it was time for me to race because I'd been following him around on a Hodaka 100. And so, but at that point in time, you couldn't get a racing license until you were 16 years old. So he forged my birth certificate. So I actually started racing against people much older than me when I was 13 or 14,
Nice.
Wow.
That's awesome.
getting my ass kicked because everybody else was shaving and they were still changing my diapers, I think. So and but when you're a kid, you learn quick. And by the time I was 16 or 17, 16, I actually won the open class amateur race on Saturday at the Hangtown National. And turned pro when I was 16, which was kind of unusual back then. And because we're talking 1972. And then quickly, so I was kind of that, that pro racer athlete dude that had a high floor and a low ceiling. So, I became pike fodder as a pro. I won a few local pro races, but through that period of time, to get back to bicycling, I'd started my first business. I'd retired from motorcycle racing, and I decided I wanted to, race again, in my early 20s. And, my buddy Paul Turner said, "Hey," and Jim Turner. So Paul, as you guys probably already know, is the Shox inventor, founder. And his brother Jim was that just retired from racing. He was Canadian national motocross champ. And they had gotten into cycling, of course.
Yeah.
And I'd done some work for Paul with my business. And he says, "Hey, let's go get on a bike. You're not going to be able to match the younger kids, with their technical acumen. That train has left. You'll never pick all that up, but maybe you can catch these guys at the halfway mark in the moto. Let's get you fitted up and get you stronger." And so I started riding with Paul and Jim and a bunch of other guys in the Redwood City, area, all the great trails, what used to be Pitts, which is now Corte Madera. And so we just rode and rode and rode. And pretty quickly, I'd switch to air scrambles and cross country racing. And pretty quickly, I was enjoying the time on the bicycle more than the motorcycle.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
So,
you know,
yeah.
talking about Paul Turner, I was in retail when the first RockShox hit the market. And we had a customer that went to a national, I think it was a Big Bear National. But he came back and he was saying, "Oh, I bought a suspension fork for my mountain bike." And, there wasn't anything at that time, and I just I just remember thinking, wow, okay, cool, I guess. I didn't know what to think. And then the thing shows up, get it shipped to our store, and it's in this box, and it weighs more than the frame, I mean, it was like so heavy. And that was my takeaway, because the whole bike industry, everything's about being light and, it's got to be light and nimble. And here's this thing, you're going to stick this on your bike. Are you nuts? That was kind of my reaction. And boy, was I wrong. uh, yeah. So just one of many things I've been wrong on over the years. But yeah, how about you, Chris? Do you remember when the RockShox first hit the market and just what a paradigm shift that was for everybody?
Oh yeah, I remember hearing about it through when the shop I was working at, and they were pretty progressive with mountain bikes at the time. So it was, it just kind of lit up the store. It was in such an exciting time when that first RockShox came into the store.
Yeah.
It it definitely changed everything for sure.
Well, and we had a Saturday ride that we would do out of the shop, and the guy with the fork, he was a good rider and all, but he wasn't the fastest descender. And that Saturday, the first Saturday on the fork, I mean, he beat everybody down the hill and had all of us just going, okay.
It definitely changed the way you had to ride though, because like you said, with that, if you were used to riding just like an aluminum fork or a steel fork, and then suddenly you've got this heavy suspension fork that obviously improved your riding. But if you were coming off something, that front end was
Yeah.
definitely a little heavier than you were used to.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, what a game changer that was. And here we are all these years later. I mean, obviously suspension technologies through the roof.
Oh yeah.
What was it like with Paul in those early days? I mean, was he creating the RockShox at the time that you guys were riding? I would imagine, but in the early days when you were riding, did he kind of always
Yeah,
have that?
he's a very understated guy, and
Mhm.
which I love about him and his brother both. They're very accomplished, both of them.
Mhm.
And he was working away at it, and of course, because of where we live, you just, it's one of those things. It's like being part of the motocross culture and the bike culture. So, I had my design company and which, grew to be something halfway decent. And so we were doing some work in the industry and then also outside of the industry. And I went down to see him one day, and he had this little, 1,000 foot. He originally, I think, was working on it when he lived in Atascadero, and then he, he relocated to Santa Cruz. And I went to visit him in this little roll-up door, light industrial 1,000 square foot space, about as small as you could rent, right?
Hmm.
And he was building them and whatnot. And, he says, "Hey, Rick, I think I'm going to start selling these things." And I go, "Wow, they look pretty cool." And he goes, "Yeah," and, because of what my business was, he goes, yeah, do you want to print me like 1,000 of the RS1 slider decals, the old pink
Uh,
RockShox decals?"
yeah.
And so, that was the first time I actually saw the fork was when I went down to visit him, and we started talking about how, I could help him. And then prior to that, he had had a tuning business for motocross after he left Honda Factory Racing. He had Paul Turner Racing, and I'd done a logo for him and some other stuff. So we had been, I wouldn't say we were spending a lot of time together because we lived about 3 or 4 hours apart from one another, but we'd see each other occasionally. And his brother was in Redwood City still because he was at Stanford getting his engineering degree after he quit racing motocross. So I actually saw Jim more often
Oh, okay.
during the early days than I saw Paul. And then we were doing some work for Keith Bontrager and stuff. So, I was bouncing around Santa Cruz a lot
Yeah.
back then.
We when I was in retail, we were a big Bontrager retailer. We sold a lot of those frames, those early frames, and yeah, those are good times. And certainly, Keith was so innovative. All the different, the cutting down of the wheels, and
Yeah.
even his rigid forks, with the different blades. You could he just yeah, he just really had some fun stuff in the early years. And yeah, and I know, yeah, I'd read that you had done some work with them as
Yeah.
well in the early years.
Yeah, so it was fun. It was a really, I think everybody gets whenever you grow up, you get a little bit nostalgic and you think it was always the best time. Our time was the best time, but
Hmm.
the late 80s and 90s, I mean, the momentum carried into the 2000s, but being at that kind of like, you know, putting the mountain bike jello into the refrigerator, and watching it sort of like firm up, that was a good time to be in the industry. Yeah.
That's a great
Yeah.
analogy. I love it. Right.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, great. So can you talk back to your childhood? Like, what did your parents do for a living? I mean, how did you get, were they, I mean, obviously your dad was into motorcycles, but what was his career path like? Is it similar to how you've gone or?
Well, he was somewhat unemployable, so we have that in common. Um, um, he was brilliant, he did recover. He was an alcoholic. He was a brilliant alcoholic, which means he'd always find a job but never keep it for too long.
Uh,
And he was a machinist, and he had a patent that he got registered on a unique inline three-wheeler hunting scooter that he invented, and we had two or three in the garage. He's always wrenching on stuff in the garage. He worked for Ray Abrams at A&A Motors. He was all part of the plastic fender revolution because there was A&A Motors, and then there was Preston Petty down in LA, because everything came with aluminum fenders on it. And then there was this whole wave, and he would machine molds. He worked at Raycam back in the early analog high-tech days, so he was always making prototypes for one of the largest electronic firms in the world. And he was always tinkering on stuff. He dropped a big block into a Willys wagon, in our driveway. And
Nice.
and he would always have me hold wrenches. And, I was the guy that had to hold the punch, and not look while he was whacking it with a, you know, and, hope that he wouldn't hit my hand or
Is this why he
something.
was still drinking? I mean, that
No,
sounds.
he was generally in pretty good shape,
Oh,
but
okay.
you know, if we would have had stock and cores, I would never have had to work. But
Yeah,
yeah, no, but he cleaned his act up eventually, and we became
yeah,
friends again. And of course, I'm so damn old that he and my mom are no longer with us. It's been a long time since they passed, but it was great growing up. The common sense, sort of practical, fix it mentality. You know, uh, you know, figuring out how to straighten out tacoed rims by just banging them on a rock. That my dad didn't show me that, but that was just like, you know, you sort of just organically absorb,
yeah,
all this know-how when you're at someone's knee or hanging onto their belt loop, from about, I don't know, memory. I could remember being in the garage when I was 6 years old,
yeah, yeah.
watching him do stuff.
What a great way to grow up, especially if you're going to be involved in this industry. How about Chris? Was your dad a tinkerer, and were you in the garage early on? I know, like for me, it wasn't really my dad's thing. And so when I started getting into bikes and cars and stuff, my dad was interested, but he wasn't, not an expert that was going to lead me, to. I had to figure out how to fix it myself. Yeah, that took a lot of time.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I think my dad too was just, I mean, he was definitely into, fixing his own things and working on his car. But, growing up with four boys, we were just, you know, gone all day. So it just wasn't really around the house enough like that to help out.
yeah, yeah. How about you? How about your mom, Rick? Was she stay-at-home mom?
She started as an accountant and then actually, you know, trained herself back in the day of, big mainframe computers and magnetic tape. She learned on the job and actually ran she retired after, I don't know, 10 or 15 years running the West Coast data center for ITT,
Hmm.
which was located in, of all places, San Mateo. That's where they set it up. And so that's what she did. And, we grew up, you know, my brother's quite a bit older than me. He passed away. So there was a gap between my brother and myself. And, we just grew up in it was quite normal back then. Now with all the McMansions out there and people wanting more space, but,
Yeah.
growing up in a two-bedroom, one-bedroom house or bathroom house, in Redwood City, and probably the funnest memory was being able to actually fire up my Hodaka 100 and ride it through town with no lights, and the cops didn't care. And then you just go up to Skyline Boulevard and drop down into Purisima. So on the weekends, my dad used and my brother used to drive up. They used to trailer their motorcycles up to Skyline. And with the Willies, they would actually go down Purisima Canyon and we'd camp out for just one night over the weekend. And so they pitch camp down there. If we weren't at a motorcycle race, that's what we would do. And he would say, "Hey, we'll see you at the camp." And I would ride right through town, up Woodside Road, up Kings Mountain Road, right past Redwood City or San Mateo County sheriffs. Not that I remember, but I'm sure they were there. I mean, here comes
Yeah.
that kid again,
Right.
and they would just wave. I mean, you couldn't get away with that stuff today. You
Oh,
never get
right.
away with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no way. Yeah. Was there any thought when you're ripping around that area about I mean, obviously it's so beautiful, right? And it's some of the you know, must ride destinations for anybody that lives in the Bay Area. Did that thought ever occur to you when you're on your motorcycle, or are you just a kid on your motorcycle just ripping around?
Yeah, I didn't know, but as soon as the mountain bike thing happened, I mean, I knew all the trails in Skaggs Point and Purissima. My dad, there was actually a trail in Purissima that I think it's called Harkins Ridge Trail now, but I didn't help. But during those weekends, they'd spend an hour or two or three or four every weekend cutting this trail that was called Sutton's Trail forever
Oh,
by the motorcycle community.
Wow.
And so I knew all the trails. We built trails from the bicycling side, all the great names and we would name the trails in Skaggs after some sort of catastrophic event, um, like nose break. Decline was because our friend Steve Klein, who raced for Bianchi for a number of years, he went careening down this trail that didn't have a name, and then he broke his leg on it, and we had to haul him out so that trail became Decline because of his name was, you
uh,
know,
yeah.
is there was this other trail that was just this skatey, powdery downhill that was in the middle of nowhere. It was definitely a poached trail that we had built, and by today's standard, it didn't matter back then, but they ended up closing it, and then we would open it up. You didn't hear that, but it was we called it cheap sunglasses because one of our friends, Mikey, found a pair of sunglasses. I don't know how I ever saw them because when you were going down that trail, you were just like on the gas, just skating through the corners. And but he has an eye for things. He stopped, and I think he's probably still, honestly, maybe not today, but he wore them damn sunglasses for years. It was
Yeah.
great.
That's a badge of honor.
Yeah,
Yes,
right.
Yeah, naming a trail is always a lot of fun. There's some great, oh my gosh, so many great trail names. I always like to try to find out what the origin is of the trail name. It's kind of fun.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
It is very,
yeah.
very much so. Anyway,
All right, so working with Paul, was that your first foray into the bike business?
it might have been Bontrager, and then through our design company and production company, we did a lot of work for Bell Sports. I mean, if
Mhm.
I were to name drop, we also did work for Atari and Apple Computer and Levi Strauss and Safeway stores. I mean, we had a pretty
Wow.
successful company.
Yeah.
But I think it was first Bontrager, um, because he really didn't have a marketing guy. And I had purchased my first legit road bike. He built it for me. And then I started racing his mountain bikes. So I got to know him, and Paul was racing his bikes as well. And so I got to know Keith. And then there was a short time, which I don't want to dive into too deeply, where Paul and I did pretty aggressively. We did triathlons for like 5 or 6 years,
Wow.
and we had both got, purchased custom road bikes with steep seat tubes from Keith, and we were racing those bikes for quite a while in the triathlon world. But through that experience, it was enthusiast driven, and I just loved the sport so much that I went out, and it kind of led to what maybe we're going to talk more about. I don't know. I don't care. Whatever you want to talk about. I said, damn, I've got this other business which I'm enjoying, but and I'm learning a lot and applying it to the bike industry now. But sitting in a meeting with a bunch of marketing nerds from Levi Strauss, is appealing. But sitting in a room with a bunch of bicycle freaks is much more appealing.
Nice.
So I said, how can I merge these two my passion for bikes with my understanding of design and production, and just started doing work. There's these things that no one will know, but maybe you remember because it was part of the RockShox. This is how goofy I am. So Paul goes, "Hey, I want a point of sale display. I want to be able to put my RockShox and have them look really nice in a store. And I want people to stare at them." And I go, "Okay, how about this, Paul? we'll look at a couple of conventional things that go into slat wall or onto grid wall back then or blah, blah, blah. But how about this? Why don't we build an a mini basketball hoop with Shox as the square behind the hoop, and we'll get a custom Nerf ball with the Shox logo, and people can just sit in bike shops and your shocks will be displayed below the basketball hoop. And I guarantee you people are just going to shoot hoops all day long and they'll be staring at you. And we must have built 1,000 of those damn things.
I totally remember those.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we definitely had one at our shop. Yeah.
Yes.
So that was your
Yeah, we
baby,
built
huh?
that. Yeah, we built that thing.
That is great.
And there were some other
Yeah.
goofy things we did for the
Uh-huh.
industry. Well, like when Bell Sports, how many times has Bell Sports sold?
Oh, jeez.
How
Yeah.
many times has it sold to the same guy?
I know. So
That's the other
strange,
question.
right?
Yeah. Anyway, they come and they've got their road gear, child seat, back in the day,
Mhm.
and they go like, "How are we going to get? We want to make sure that families buy these things, and they just get stacked in the floor on the corner, and collecting dust in the box or whatever." And it was he was famous at the time. We couldn't rip it off because there was obviously trademark infringement. But so do you guys remember the purple dinosaur that you could put the road gear child seat on?
Oh,
Uh-huh.
right.
Yeah.
That was another one of my goofy ideas. Yeah.
Uh-huh. You can't say the name though.
That's right. Okay, it wasn't Barney, but it was Barney-like. It was Barney-like, It was like a
Uh-huh.
Maxxis tire with one X, you know.
Uh-huh. I
Um,
love both of those examples because I do feel like the bike industry, we're always going after the tip of the spear. I feel like and the broader market is obviously just everybody, just you know, the non-cycling human. And I remember when the basketball thing was in our shop and I was talking with our service manager at the time, and he's just like, why basketball? What is basketball has nothing to do with bike riding. I go, first of all, we're talking about it. Second of all, how many times have you thrown that ball through the hoop?
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, but I still don't get it. Why? I mean, why basketball? I'm just like, you're missing the whole point, you
Right.
know?
Yeah. You don't even
Yeah,
have to be a basketball fan,
right,
want to take a
right.
shot, right? It's
Sure.
one of those
Yeah, I
things.
still throw hook shots into my garbage.
yeah.
So it's a universal thing. And
Yeah, that's
basket,
uh
yeah.
that's so true. People ask me why'd I call it the Sea Otter Classic? Why didn't I come up with a more aggressive name? Like go out and kill yourself riding your mountain bike all day, classic.
Uh-huh.
Um, because I think the the tip of the arrow, the tip of the spear, whatever, the overly self-indulgent, overly competitive part of the market, which we all are members of.
Yes.
It's sort of like Alcoholics Anonymous, right? We all are members of that club.
Yeah.
And we don't need anything to get us to a bike race or buy something. We're the last people we should be talking to.
Yeah.
We
Good
we
point.
convince ourselves,
Yeah.
you know, and to a fault sometimes. And so I always felt that if you designed whatever it was, um, and I mean authentic experiences too, not the on the bike experience. If you design the experience to appeal to casual riders or first time riders or people that have a life beyond the bike, if you make it non-threatening and enjoyable, then they get into it and then they ratchet up. If they don't fall out quickly, which we also have a tendency to do. Hi, you got a bike? Let's go for a 100-mile ride. We
Yeah.
tend to do that to people. Hey, there's this group ride, let's drop you.
Right.
And but if we can get people into the sport at a level that they feel they can enjoy it, why did I put bouncy houses at the Sea Otter Classic?
Yeah.
So the whole family could show up. So the dude didn't feel guilty and jump back in his truck and go home to mow the yard. How can I get people to hang out?
Yeah.
That's
And
interesting. Like we were just at a store this weekend. It's like RC Wiley's, and it looks like a Vegas showroom because there's like furniture, but there's also like this little arcade, and we were like, what is this doing in this place? And I'm like, if you were shopping for furniture, you could just send your kids off. You could get so much more accomplished, but having an activity for your kids to participate in while you're shopping, it's a great idea.
Well, I remember too, there was a good marketing push on, the family festival. I think it was Family Cycling Festival, I think is, um, but I just remember, one as a race, as a racer person, bike racer, bike enthusiast, love the Sea Otter because you had all these different things going on. And so it was cool. If you were somebody that wanted to ride all the bikes, well, that's a great event. Or if you just did one bike, but also like to watch this other stuff, there was just always something to stick around for, even if your event was just 1 day or 2 days. Um, but I remember the family festival atmosphere, and that really changed. I mean, just changed things tremendously in terms of people coming and like you say, hanging out with their family.
yeah, and I think, all credit, I was the goofball um, marketing guy, course designer, schedule. I put the schedule together. So if somebody did have four different types of bicycles in the garage, they could bring them all.
Hmm.
And I would make sure that, the pro events in road and mountain bike weren't happening at the same time and vice versa, whether it was beginner or cat five. I don't know why we went to number. There's another screw up I don't get. Like numbers don't mean crap. Back when it was beginner, intermediate, or sport and whatnot, people understood,
Yeah,
hey, where to go.
right.
Anyway, we'll put that USAC conversation to the side. And the I would work really hard so that, and back in the day, it's different now. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful event still,
Man.
but
Yeah,
it's different now. We had 15,000 events entered and 11,000 athletes because people did bring more than one bike and they
yeah,
would do more than one thing. Now the schedule doesn't allow that as much as it used to. But that was always fun. We did other things like before it made sense. We did 5-year age groups for women because we knew if we gave them an opportunity to be successful against people their same age, that the categories would eventually fill up. We did equal prize money back before it was a thing for the
yeah.
pros. Um, you know, did did things that I felt were nurturing,
Hmm.
and we carried that through to the World Cups in Napa, cyclocross nationals, a lot of the other stuff that we ran over the years. You know.
Yeah. Um, the I mean, there was times where like I wouldn't race cyclocross all year, but then or the previous year, and then Sea Otter would come around and I'd see the course, I'd be like, oh, good thing I bought my cross bike,
Uh-huh.
because the course was always something pretty crazy, and also it's fun as somebody that works in the industry to race your cross bike and then go through an area where like all these industry people are around and they're all just heckling you and making fun. I mean, it's yeah, you created something really great there for sure. Can we go back to the beginning? Because you had a partner, Frank Johanan. How did that relationship kind of develop?
No, it's so funny because in 1991, early in 91, I'd been to a bunch of mountain bike races, including Mammoth and Big Bear. And, I didn't venture to Colorado or anything, but I just seen the production values and, coming from pro motocross, there was a difference
Hmm.
in production value, marketing value, quite frankly. If I'm not going to be, you know, you know, filleted on the barbecue by your listeners, what is the business value here and how can we grow the sport, both for the consumer and bring more value to the sponsors so they can get more out of it. And so I started thinking about putting on bike races. And I said, well, I don't know how to get permits or anything, but I'm a motorhead. Maybe I can go to Laguna Seca and just talk to one person and get one permit and not have to go to a bunch of different agencies. So
Yeah.
I called him up, and the event I put on was in the fall of 1991, and it was called the Challenge of Champions. It was a very unique event, and it wasn't anything like Sea Otter is today, except that there was a bunch of different types of equipment. And basically, I put on a 2-day event, which was like the old ABC Superstars competition. I invited the best runners in the country, the world, the best mountain bikers, the best road cyclists, and the best multidiscipline athletes. And it wasn't, quick time transitions, but we had three events on, excuse me, we had three events on Saturday and one event on Sunday. The event on Sunday was a duathlon that was run entirely on the race course. Uh,
Oh.
Ran a lap, cycled like 10 or 15 laps, and then ran a lap. So can you imagine running down the corkscrew? Whoa! And so, but on the first day, there was how do we do it? Yeah, I actually brought lights in. The first day was a long day. We did a mountain bike race in the morning, a road race in the after, or a circuit race in the afternoon, and a 10K run in the evening at twilight underneath the lights.
Wow.
And who was there? I love this. This is actually, and it actually, I lost my ass, but I got an MBA in event promotion. It's like a college degree.
Yeah.
What not to do. And the So this guy who actually was the reason I got out of the promotion business, this young 19-year-old by the name of Lance Armstrong won the men's event. Aaron Baker won the women's event.
Uh,
Ned Overend got second. And this incredible athlete that probably nobody remembers unless you're our age, Greg McNeil, who San Luis Obispo, U.S. national team rider and collegiate superstar cross country racer or runner. He got third, but Mike Pigg was there, Harold Robinson,
yeah.
Sherry Rogers, who became Sherry Kane. There were just a number of great athletes that were there. Had an hour on ESPN, um, you know, and that was how I got started. And then Frank also had an event that year that was lower key, which isn't to say it wasn't great. It was just lower key. It was local. And he ran that event again in 92. I didn't run my event in 93 because by the time he ran his event in 92, which was called the Laguna Seca Challenge, mine was called the Challenge of Champions. There was a lot of coincidental stuff, even though we didn't know each other.
Mhm.
We worked out a deal that we would combine his knowledge of the local area, his connections, because he's military, and then my understanding of sports marketing and my connections in the industry. We were 50-50 partners for 15 years.
Huh.
And, I drew the first Otterhead, the logo that still exists. And by 93, we were partners. So his event had um, shuttered, so to speak. My event had shuttered, and we combined to form a new company called Sea Otter Classic LLC. And the first year that it was called the Sea Otter Classic was 1993. And
Yeah.
then it grew from there through all sorts of fun stuff. We had an AVB volleyball tournament there as part of the festival. Everybody remembers the inline skating
Oh yeah.
craziness that went on there.
Yeah.
Grimy handshake, saw the bouncy houses and the inline skating and all the goofy stuff we were doing. And he said, "What's Sutton going to do next? Dwarf tossing?" You know, that in one of his articles. And
Uh,
yeah, and and we grew. I think the most interesting thing is because we were inclusive, and I don't mean to take shots at Morgan Hill, but the Cactus Cup was the big thing
yeah.
back in the spring. But now that you work at GT and whatnot, and but Specialized, we'll leave names out of it. Specialized was very exclusive. All the team trucks had to park, a mile away. They weren't part of the expo. Um, and the athletes went and did well from all the teams back in the day, Schwinn, Mongoose, GT, all the different groups back in the day, the names that we all know, some still exist, some don't.
Mhm.
And they got fed up and they said, "Hey, so, Greg Herbold went to this event up there and he says it's a really cool place to ride, and let's just all caravan up there next year." So one year, I don't know whether, I think it was 95. It was only 2 years later, the third Sea Otter. All of a sudden, I'm getting phone calls from Todd Huffman at
Oh yeah.
GT, from Dave Mack at Schwinn. And they're going like, "Hey, we want to come to your event." And then, Tom Ritchie, "You got to pay us. Everybody else wants to come." He goes, "If you want Frishy there, you got to pay us." And I said, "Dude, I ain't got no money." If you want to ride your bike, just come and ride your bike, okay?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
he did. He caved in, and
Uh,
Richie showed up, and then it just, I mean, there's tons of stories. I mean, it could go on forever, you know,
right.
but there's just tons of stories. And that catapulted us to meetings with eventually with ASO about, hey, and they came over and visited, and I looked at them going like, "How the hell do you put on the Tour de France?" And they looked at this craziness like we were up on the hill where the dual slalom course is,
Yeah,
and they're looking down and they're seeing like 4 or 5 events going on at once, and all sorts of kids, DFL Xeroxing number plates so that they can only have to buy one entry and get everybody else in for free. All this crap going on, which is
yeah,
just lovely in my mind.
yeah.
And they're looking at it and they going like, "I don't know how you do it." And I looked at them and I'm going like, "How the hell do you run a 23-day event,
Oh
you
yeah.
know, around France?" So it was kind of like this mutual admiration society where they had no clue how we pulled it off, and vice versa,
Yeah.
so it's kind of cool.
Man. Yeah. I mean, the dual slalom at Sea Otter, I mean, that's as far as spectator goes, it's about as fun as it can possibly be, I think. It's the highlight of the event. Everybody gets up on that mountain and it's just the riding, the crowd, the commentary. It's something you just have to experience. It's so fun. But I mean, you could say that about a lot of the events there. Like I mentioned, cyclocross earlier. Everybody's having a good time. The atmosphere is right for it. Um, I go back to that your first event with people running down the corkscrew. What a memory that would be for somebody. I mean, like you said, you invited these world-class athletes over, and and they're running down the corkscrew. I mean, that's something that none of them will ever forget. And I can't help but think like, were they looking over their shoulder like, is there going to be some speedy car at some point going to take
Yeah,
me out
Mario,
here?
Mario Andretti going to go flying by
Right.
me, and
Yeah,
yeah, right, yeah,
yeah. What a
yeah,
what a what a cool thing that must have been for them. And
Now,
uh and in everybody's sense. I mean, the racing there over the years, it's incredible. I'll tell you that I have some really gnarly weather experiences. Some of those early events, early in the calendar. Oh my gosh. Yeah, my son who's now 30. I think he was like I don't know, like 13 or 14 or something. I convinced him to come work the booth with me one day, and it was like one of those days where it was just raining sideways and flash flood. And I have a picture of him. He's sitting like with this poncho, this rain poncho on. He's just sitting there, just shivering.
you,
I feel like such a bad dad. Uh, but
You guys know Chris Zigmont, right? You know,
oh
old
yeah,
Mavic guy and whatnot.
yeah.
Yeah. So Chris, he comes up to me like it's like Tuesday or Wednesday. I've got a couple of Zigmont stories that are hilarious. He comes up to me and he just starts pointing his finger and he's going like, Jesus, and he goes, I hate Sea Otter, and he's just poking the bear, right? And
Sure.
and I go, well, why do you hate Sea Otter? He goes, I have to bring every lick of clothing I own. I don't know whether it's going to be 90 degrees or 30 degrees and freezing. I bring everything I own to
Sometimes in the same day
yeah.
too.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's a weather system, that's for sure. But since you moved it farther back on the calendar,
Yeah, no, that
or
and
farther forward, I should
to
say.
his
Yeah.
credit, that was Frank's idea, especially after, the the racing industry sort of either caved in or hit a lull around 2005. We had it in March because everybody wanted to come to California in March.
Hmm.
Um, you'd have Frishy doing one of Bob Leibold's doing the Copperopolis road race before, just running, riding an NCNCA race.
Yeah.
You'd have people doing Redlands. And then we had the Napa World Cup, the very weekend after. And that turnaround, because we ran both events, imagine that running
Yeah.
Sea Otter, and then by the next Wednesday being up and running, having another venue up and running in Napa. That was heavy
Wow.
lifting.
Yeah.
Crazy.
And so, but the weather was, March, it's still raining. April, it dries out. I mean, it's still going to rain occasionally in April, but the
Hmm.
likelihood of being in a monsoon at Sea Otter is, 10% of what it is 3 or 4 weeks earlier. So yeah, the weather was crazy. Yeah, yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Creates a lot of memories.
Yeah.
But I don't think I've ever been as cold as I've been. Well, no, I have to take that back now. I had an experience recently where I got hypothermia, but but yeah, at Sea Otter, just work in a booth. You're stuck. You're standing there. You're trying to do the jumping jacks, run in place, do everything you can to try to stay warm sometimes. And then other times you're talking to somebody, doing a presentation, and then the heat just hits you and you got 6 layers of clothes on and you're just like, I'm sorry, I gotta take this off. I gotta I'm sorry. Give me a second, So
Yeah,
yeah, and then maybe an hour and a half later you're shoving it all back on again, to yeah.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But yeah, boy, so many great memories over the year. I think my first year was, I want to say it was like 96, I think was my first
It
Sea
was
Otter.
starting to boom by then.
Hmm.
Yeah, it was starting to
Hmm.
boom. And
Yeah.
yeah, for sure.
Now, where did like in I think it was 95 maybe I did the Bud Light Classic at that at that location. So was Sea Otter
Yeah, we
overlapping
did
with
the
that?
well, I can't remember what happened, whether they came out and did a Roost Master on their own. I know there was one year where I think they might have done it on their own. I really can't remember, but I remember there was one year we had a Roost Master as part of Sea Otter. They wanted to bring their event into what we were doing because by that point in time, I mean, they had their own coverage, but we were both on OLN. So there were some economies of scale that OLN could realize by not having separate events. Outdoor Life Network for the youngsters listening.
Yeah.
And and um, so they came in, and then after that, the Roost Master went away. It was a really good course because up there on the dual slalom bowl, I mean, we could lay out a pretty amazing short track course, and which we did for years and years prior to Roost Master, and then with Roost Master and after Roost Master. Great, great course used to be laid out there,
Hmm.
and And so, yeah, so the Roost Master was a thing at Sea Otter, and then maybe once before on its own. Yeah.
How do I always wondered like how do the events get prioritized? Like some events come and go. I know like I grew up with a BMX bike and dirt jumping
Hmm.
was like a big thing for me. I know you had dirt jumping there for a lot of years and then that kind of went. I know you had four cross. That was super popular to me and it seemed like it was a pretty popular event, but that didn't stick. And then I remember going one year you had like maybe it was more than one year, but I remember uh there was mountain bike dirt jumping, which was kind of like really early in the and
No,
I
it was one of
remember
the best events. It went away because I left, maybe.
oh, okay.
And it was one of the things that fell by the wayside. But I'll tell you, a person who actually vaulted the dirt jumping contest into whatever notoriety it grew to there. And it was a total, I mean, the dual slalom followed by the jumping contest was just nutty good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
And but wearing I mean, typical BMXer wearing his jeans and, some sort of pudding bowl helmet. I don't know. He looked like Joe Robert on a CZ in 1963 or something. And he, Kyle Strait was 13 years old,
Wow.
and
Yeah.
he's jumping against Tomac and Cedric Gracier and all these world-class gravity racers, right?
Yeah.
And he just schooled him.
Yeah.
And we gave him whatever it was back then, 500 or $1,000. And I'll never forget it. It really, there's a lot of these stories that make Sea Otter special, but this is one that is like, I remember at the end of the jumping contest, there's this kid in Cedric Gracier, whatever, the $100,000 athlete for Cannondale back in the
Yeah.
day, and maybe more, but that just kind of, so you got this pros pro, and he's one of the nicest guys in the world. He
And most
went down,
stylish. Yeah.
world champion for crying out loud.
Yeah.
He went down in the finish area, the bowl, the chute, whatever you call it. Um, and he at the end, he went up to Kyle and he said, "You deserved this win." And there's this 13-year-old kid and this 25, 28-year-old adult, having this moment together. It was
Yeah.
just amazing. It was just
Yeah.
amazing.
Well, I remember because I just remember seeing a tail whip on a mountain bike for the first time, and I think it was Kurt Voorhees that,
Mm,
but and it just like opened my mind to like what you could do on a mountain bike because I just never thought that was possible, the front brake and all this stuff, but he had it figured out, and it's like from that moment on, all of a sudden it's like, oh, I need to figure out how to get this to go on my mountain bike. Maybe I can start hitting dirt jumps on my mountain bike because I was just riding a 20 at the time. And
mm.
yeah, but man, I love that event. I'm glad to hear you say that it was great also because I didn't know if I was just, caught up in it because I was, had the BMX roots, but it just seemed like and then when it went away, it kind of changed a little bit. So at one point it was up there with the dual slalom, and then another point you had like the separate demo area, and then I think it was a college
Yeah, that was after
cyclery.
my time. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
they did some stuff. I
And that
mean,
was
we
still
used to
pretty
have.
good. That was good
Hmm?
too.
Oh
I'm
yeah, yeah,
sorry.
yeah. Oh
Yeah, that
yeah.
was
No,
good too.
things evolve. I mean, I want to be very careful in that, everything changes over time. I sold it for a reason.
Hmm.
Frank bought me out. It's all good. It's just, you know, different. And, when you put different people behind the wheel of I was responsible for all of the competition, all the sponsorship sales, all of the marketing. And, I mean, when you grow up like the three of us do, that kind of leads how those decisions are made. And then when that personality leaves the organization, and then you have more of a business person making the decisions, which is great. Nothing wrong with being,
Sure.
Right.
risk adverse.
Yeah.
That's a good thing. We're all risk adverse with our bank accounts and stuff.
Yeah.
But it just changes the personality of the event. I got to tell you, I mean, we flew, I mean, hey, did you sign a release? I don't know. Okay, well, hey, go down to registration. Let's bring some releases up and let's just get everybody to sign a release before they take their first jump, just to make sure we have double releases,
Yeah.
you know. And I
Uh,
don't think in today's world, not just Sea Otter, but in today's world, that level of um, risk isn't isn't allowable anymore.
yeah.
It
Yeah,
just isn't.
exactly.
Yeah. I get it. Yeah, but so back to how the events come and go. Is there like I know that you at one point there was like a panel, there's like a committee. Is that part of the committee's duties, or is it just more like, hey, this really wasn't happening, or this logistically was really tough, or overlap?
Well,
Because you mentioned the four bikes.
I think now we had that old motocross course, and
Hmm.
we did 2 years. We did an NBL National, BMX National over there,
Yeah.
and that went really well. But because of the weather, so unpredictable and so expensive to build a really quality BMX course, we didn't do BMX, and that was weather related. So we did BMX for 2 years, had a national as part of the event, and that was really cool.
Hmm.
One year went well because it was dry. The other year, nothing worse than a BMX race riding through oatmeal.
Yeah.
And so we didn't do that anymore, but we did four cross. And I wrote the rules of four cross with Eric Carter. He had did the demonstration event at the forget which course it was, but there was a USGP. Let's just say it was a Carlsbad. I don't think it was Carlsbad. It was one of the other motocross courses down south. And and he just did a demonstration event and with four or five guys. And he calls me up and he says, "Hey, Rick, can we do four cross at Sea Otter?" And I took it because I was on the UCI commission at the time, Mountain Bike Commission. I said, "Hey, we're going to do a demonstration event. And I'm going to write the rules and I want you to sanction it as a demonstration event." And then it eventually became a world championship discipline, or rather quickly, within a year or two, it became.
Hmm.
So it was Eric's idea to do four cross. I basically crafted the rules. He read them to make sure that there was fair play. We built, a pneumatic start gate. We did all of that stuff. Team Big Bear was very important and still is at Sea Otter in terms of timing and some other stuff.
Hmm.
And and we built the biggest damn four cross course. I'll email you guys some pictures. The
Okay.
airtime it was, I mean, it was groomed, so it wasn't like Rampage, but the airtime, very similar. I mean, these
Oh,
guys
wow.
were in the air for a long, long time. And we did that for 3 or 4 years. But what we learned through that's a unique situation. There are other political issues that make events come and go that I wasn't a fan of. But this particular decision, four cross is really a whole shot event.
Hmm.
If you make it to the first corner first, you can control the race because there's not enough horsepower for the riders to get by you at speed. Because the time it takes at 20 to 25 miles an hour to pass somebody is 100 yards.
Yeah.
You don't just zoom by them because you blip the throttle.
Yeah.
And so it became a whole shot event, and the courses were somewhat expensive to build. They are terrain specific, so they didn't translate. The courses oftentimes didn't translate to ski resorts just because of the way the terrain is and how you have to lay out the course. So I think it was the right thing. I think the fact that dual slalom doesn't exist as a world championship event is sad,
Yeah.
but the fact that four cross needed to go away, it was just, um, it was all about location, location, location. And if your location didn't lend itself to a four cross course, then it was going to be a boring race.
Hmm. Yeah, I always felt like four cross was like the thing that would translate the most to like the general person out there. Like if it was for ESPN, or whatever, some kind of TV coverage. I always felt like four cross, but but to your point, it was a whole shot event. If it was tweaked just a little bit, maybe had some. It wasn't so much downhill where maybe occasionally you had like a flat section or maybe a slightly up section or maybe a tight berm slightly up into another berm.
See,
You know what I
I'm
mean?
too old for this. I'm too old for this conversation. Let's go out and put on the first enduro cross where you have to.
Oh,
Yeah.
right, right. Yeah, I was just, as a young person in the sport, I always wanted to see it get more coverage. I think all of us that grew up, in that time
Mhm.
where the sport was emerging, there was all these cool personalities, this cool, it was a great activity, it's super fun, anybody could do it, and it just never really, it just couldn't compete with ball sports when it came to TV, and so we never really got that. The national momentum
Mm,
behind the sport. Like I always felt like it was there, but it's hard to package it in a way that, you know, the different types of disciplines are hard to cover and expensive to cover too. Like you look at how they cover the Tour de France. I mean, the coverage is amazing, but I mean, very expensive to,
yeah, and
put
things
that
are a little
together.
bit easier now with drones and stuff, so I think it might be more successful now. But
Hmm.
the those people, no,
The man.
folks, you know, you must have been killing it at Sea Otter Sutton. I'm going, look, well, it had like almost a $2 million budget to put that
Wow.
weekend on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, some of that was covered, obviously it was paid for one way or the other, but, to actually put together the 10 hours of OLN coverage, there was a helicopter, there was a fixed wing aircraft, there was three or four extra motos that I brought in for cameramen to be out on course. There was a production truck on site. There was six talent commentators because they would bring in road commentators, endurance cross country commentators, and gravity commentators. And then when we had BMX, they'd bring in some sort of, grommet to talk about BMX. And just the TV production, which nobody thinks about when you're out there having fun, drinking beer, watching the dual slalom.
Right.
But that there's some serious costs. And when you think about why do these things not last on TV? Well, what do you have to cover a poker tournament or a billiards tournament? One or
Right.
two cameras and one guy.
Yeah.
There's no helicopter in the air. There's not five or six motorcycles with five or six cameramen on the back that you're paying, Hollywood day rates to have them there to, cover the event. It's cycling. It's easy to wish and it's easy to complain, but it is one of the most expensive, difficult events to cover and also to cover in a way that's entertaining to the schmo that's sitting on their couch.
Right.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
one of the things I look at some Olympic sports and I say, and cycling is one of them, bat and ball sports, the better you are at it, the more energy, the more the ball flies farther. If you're into gladiator sports, the tackles are noisier and more dramatic in football. In swimming and running and cycling, even downhill stuff, it's about efficiency. And the better you are at it, the easier you make it look. I always thought if I really wanted to tell America how difficult it is to ride a bike, I'd film a beginner mountain bike race from start to finish. And they would go like, holy shit, I can't believe how hard that is.
Right? Yeah. Well, I think that's a great point. And I hadn't really thought about it like that. But the one that comes to mind was the Danny Hart World Championship run, right? Where he's slipping and sliding all over the place, and the commentators just losing his mind. That's a pretty fun one too, But yeah, I mean, yeah, it is. It's just I just wish more Americans would get into the sport and have an appreciation for it. I recently did a trip to Europe. It was a couple of summers ago, and to see just the general love of the cyclist, and how you're portrayed over there. You're not a nuisance. That people will roll down their window and ask you if you want a bottle of water while you're
Yeah.
climbing up some hill. It's like it's just a completely different animal over there. And I don't know that
Yeah.
it could ever be that way here, but certainly TV can endear people for a lot of different things. And I was just always hoping that, maybe cycling could get
I
to that
think we're
spot at
seeing
some point.
growth, because of the pandemic. I mean, there are more rider days, more rider hours.
Hmm.
Aftermarket parts sales are up. People are riding more. And I think, I hate to be, but I've been doing this so long. It's not a criticism, it's just the reality of it. If you want a European cycling experience, move to Europe. It's not going to happen here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. I don't know. They're on YouTube. They got these, buy this Italian villa for $1. And they got this whole thing about like they want you to move. You have to buy, if you buy it, you have to live there. They're trying to re-energize these villages where people have exited.
You know, you know what I want to do? It's sort of like I'm riffing on the X Games.
Hmm.
Here's what I want to do, because usually when people get a little bit older, they have a little bit more discretionary income. Maybe their kids are out of the house and whatnot.
Sure.
So I want to go up into the Sierra foothills, like maybe even north, to Stony Ford or something. I want to buy a bunch of property, and I want to open Gray X Ranch, and I want to put an orthopedic clinic right in the middle of it. And I'm going to build all these courses, for
Uh-huh.
motocrossers that are gray, for mountain bikers that are gray, for skateboarders that are gray, for water skiers that are gray. I'll put a lake in the middle of it. And then there's going to be the first two buildings I'm going to build after people buy their little timeshare place to put their little 40-foot, trailer on or whatever.
Hmm.
And I'll groom the courses and everything. I'm going to buy an old chairlift and put it up so people can chairlift to the top of the property. And I'm going to put a pub, and I'm going to put an orthopedic clinic. And
All
they're
right.
going to be timeshares, and you can just like,
Listen, I hate to break it to you, but the way this is going to go is they're going to go maybe to the pub first, then to the chiropractic, back to the pub, maybe down to the lake. The courses will be, there might be one or two nutballs up there trying to do something, but the rest of the people will be down at the lake or at the pub.
they'll be bench racing. They'll be bench racing
That's
like we're
right.
bench racing. Remember back in the day,
Right. Like a
yeah.
fire pit session.
Uh-huh.
Remember when brakes didn't work and we still went down shit, and
That's right.
somehow we stopped at the bottom. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, bikes have come a long way for sure. And those of us that were there in the early days, I remember riding Downeyville down and I have both my brakes fully on. I'm riding down basically like a river of water, and
Right.
both my brakes are on, and it's not really slowing me down at all. And I'm just hanging on for dear life and trying to steer, and now, to today, that was on a hardtail. Did have a rock shock up front. But nowadays you got the big, 200 millimeter rotors and
Oh
big
yeah,
old 2.6 tires. It's just like a
this
different
is
animal.
much more forgiving, but the speeds are higher too.
Oh yeah.
I mean, the courses tend to, the bikes tend to modify the courses, even though they're the same courses, the lines change and everything. So, the reason we didn't crash is that we would ride lines that allowed us to just somehow, bump into a tree and
Yeah.
stop without hurting ourselves. And
Uh,
Did you ever ride the Lemurian? Did you ever ride the chutes at
I,
Lemurian?
I didn't do it.
Oh my God, that was the craziest because it would snow up there and you'd be freezing to death. And then you'd have these stupid V brakes that, well, I don't know. They were it was sort of like Class C motorcycle racing where you didn't use brakes at all. And you would go down this crazy chute and they would run a hare scrambles the day after. So there's a moto day before, day after. So we'd ride up there. It was a great event. The Lemurian Classic was gnarly. It was
Yeah.
a cool event. Anyway, um,
That was up at Shasta
yeah, yeah,
or
yeah. That
Whiskey. Was
was
it Whiskey Town or Shasta?
no, it was Shasta.
It was
Yeah, it was
Shasta.
right. The I only did it 2 years, but the 2 years I rode it, you started right near the dam. And then, it was just this monster climb and then this descent, and you did like 2 or 3 laps. By the third lap, second or third lap, whatever, by the last lap, when you're going down the chute on a rigid Bontrager with, God bless Paul Turner, an early edition rock shocks that didn't really have a fork brace on it yet. And so, you
Hmm.
do this and it would still go straight,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And hope he's not listening. He's going to send me a nasty email or something. But yeah, but yeah, that was cool. Anyway, what else?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we could talk Sea Otter, I think, for hours and hours. I'm sure the stories um, just go on and on with all the years that you ran it. And yeah, such an iconic event. But how did I would I know I know that you were VP of sales at Specialized at some point in
Oh God.
2005.
Yeah.
How did that go, need I ask?
Those were dog years. It's like 2 years at Specialized is like 14
Oh
anywhere else.
man. Yeah.
The so when I sold the sports marketing company, and probably if I were to say I want to mention anything, it's a little bit about the Napa World Cup and how that, because that's hilarious how that
Yeah.
came to be. But maybe we can sneak that in
Yeah,
later.
let's
But
do it.
no, let's answer your question first.
All right.
So when we had the sports marketing company for 2 years, we were actually the production company that Specialized hired to run their dealer event at in Santa Cruz. And so Mike was aware of what I was up to, and they knew about my design background and whatnot. And he actually, I was only there 2 years because he and I weren't a good match. Um, Fraser Ali, down goes Fraser. And
That's the analogy. Oh boy.
so he says, "Man, I've got this floundering program, and you're a free agent now. Why don't you come work for me? What do you want me to do? I want you to be VP of Retail Services." And I go, "What's that?" "Well, we want to do these concept stores." And I can't get it off the ground. You have all this display and manufacturing background. You know the sport really well. You know, you're either hated or loved in the industry. People know you. So why don't you come to work for me? Okay, why not? How many
Yeah.
times have you heard that story about Specialized?
Oh
It'll
man.
be different with me. I can make this work.
I
And
think every
so,
sales guy kind of has that in
yeah,
them,
yeah,
or
yeah.
marketing
So,
person,
yeah. So
Yeah.
I went down there and I launched the retail real quickly. In less than a year, I had 20 locations worldwide under contract. In less than 2 years, I had like 5 or 6 stores opened, and I had, with a team, there were 2 or 3 people that were helping me. I had 400 different retail point of sale SKUs in the catalog, all manufactured in China. Went to China 2 or 3 times to finalize all that. Everything from gondolas on casters to bike racks to cash wraps to shoe shelves to whatever, everything you needed to outfit a store, lighting suggestions, color palettes, everything.
Mhm.
And I think where I'd like to leave it off is that I learned that philosophically I wasn't a good match for Sea Otter, or for not Sea Otter, but for Specialized. I was a good match for Sea Otter,
I think so.
but it just But what did I learn? Much like I learned from Frank at Sea Otter, I'll tell you the relationships that I built there specifically that are benefiting me now and when I took the break from the industry and got into health tech. Mike Haynes, the CFO there,
Oh yeah.
taught me about international finance. He
Hmm.
really did. The 2 years I would have lunch with that guy 2 or 3 times a week. I would see these elaborate spreadsheets and I would understand exchange rates and turn rates and everything that I didn't know about international business from a fiduciary point of view. Mike Haynes taught me.
Wow.
And that
Is that
was
now was Mike, did he work at GT?
bingo.
Yeah. Yeah. Mike Haynes took over when Richard passed, tragically, in
Yeah.
that motorcycle crash. I was actually at GT at that time and Mike Haynes took over as CEO.
Yeah. So,
Yeah. Interesting.
but it was 2 years and it was it was good because I learned a lot. And yeah, so that was the deal there.
So
Yeah.
were they already doing concept stores before that? I'm just thinking because, I'd worked with Mike when I was a giant retailer and we were one of their first stores to kind of do one of their retail partner, store designs. So,
They had never really done anything. You guys know Super Go and Alan Goldsmith?
Oh
yeah.
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 Mhm.
Yep.
So he had hired Alan before me, and Alan was there for 3 or 4 years, and they had all these concept drawings. But, I think Chris probably, I don't know when you did that, but I was there from 2005 to 2007. And we opened up 3 or 4 stores in Europe, one in Shanghai, because Tony Herdrick was running the Asian operation. So I went over when I was building all of the fixtures. I went over and met with Tony, and we found a location to open up a specialized concept store in the expat community of Shanghai. And then we did, a couple up in Santa Rosa. We did Rock and Road, one of their stores down in the Southern California area, and a couple of others, a couple back east. Did an Eric's up in Minnesota, converted
Oh
one of
yeah.
their stores. Yeah,
Well, he's a man, he's got an empire there, Eric's.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well,
Uh-oh.
look out. I don't know.
Uh-oh.
We lost
Uh-oh. That's
Chris.
like when you see one shoe on the freeway and you wonder what's
I think he
happening.
was offended at your, I'm just kidding. Um, yeah, Eric, I cover Hawaii for Giant, and I know it sounds ridiculous, but it's pretty great gig as you might imagine. But I always run into Eric over there,
Hmm?
and that's how I met him. And yeah, I think he had 27 stores when I met him, and I mean,
Oh yeah, he's done a
pretty
great job. Yeah,
pretty wild empire he's built for
yeah,
sure. And Specialized's been a big part of that.
right.
Yeah, I do remember Alan Goldsmith going on, with Supergo and then uh, aligning with Specialized. And so, did you and Alan work together on those
A little
early
bit. Like
ones?
he was glad that I came in to actually realize the project.
Hmm.
Um, because he was having whatever. I spent a lot of time for 6 months. So it wasn't the typical or a difficult transition where Alan had left and then I came in. He we worked together on it for a few months. He gave me his journal of what he had accomplished and we worked hand in hand for a little while.
Yeah, yeah. Well, he certainly, I mean, when I was in retail, Supergo was a problem, I mean, they were getting, and we tried to do high-end mountain at our shop, and I mean, we did it, well, I think we did a great job on a local level, but, Supergo just always, we would just lose to Supergo often, and it was
Yeah.
very frustrating.
Yeah,
Uh,
well, he was, yeah, I don't know. He was like analog Amazon is what I would,
yeah, right. Definitely
yeah,
ahead of his time, kind of a
yeah,
kingpin of the
yeah.
era. All right, let's talk about Napa because I have a Napa experience as a young BMX, transitioning into mountain biking. So I go to Napa, I ride the course, and I'm riding this section, and it's so hard. I mean, I'm on the single track and I'm going up this thing and I'm just pedaling and then I get off and I stumble. I've got my bike on my shoulder. Then no, I got to get on my bike. So then I get back on my bike and I'm just having this heck of this time. And all of a sudden I hear this ruckus behind me and it's like, ah, ah, ah. And I turn around and it was Ned Overend. And he jumped off his bike, had it on his shoulder, and just sprinted by me. And I was like, oh, maybe I should just put it on my shoulder. But that course was tough, as I remember.
Yeah,
I mean, it may
yeah.
be my viewpoint of it might be a little bit disjointed because I was so young in mountain biking at the time. But
It was a tough course. I mean, I was riding as well as I ever did, and we were given, that park, Skyline Park was, and then we eventually moved it to Domaine Chandon, which was cool. But to focus on Skyline in the few minutes we have left,
yeah,
that was one of the most difficult and fair courses, according to the pros, that they ever rode, because even though there was climbing involved, the technical demands of the course actually balanced the course out in a way that it wasn't always the lightest, best climber that would do well there. And in
hmm,
fact, Rune Højdahl won it one year there, and as did a Whippet climber. Miguel Martinez won it there,
okay,
and but Allison Dunlop won there as well,
yeah,
as did Paula Pezzo. And so it was a very fair course in terms of you couldn't predict who was going to win. But the interesting part of the story is how we actually came to run that event. So it was October the previous year, and that event was the last weekend of March. I'm looking at the time we have left, so I'm going to try to be quick here. The
we can go long if need be, if
Yeah,
as long as you're okay
the
with it. Yeah.
the so I get a call from USA Cycling, and again, I'll leave names out of it. Hey, Rick, we have the opening round of next year's World Cup. Do you want to run it for us? And I'm going like, well, so you need a production company? Sure, if we can work out the costs and everything, let's do this. And I go, where is it? And he goes, oh, Montera, California, Half Moon Bay. And I'm going, really? And I'm going, where are you going to run it there? Well, we sanctioned a mountain bike race there once on Montera Mountain. And I'm going, yeah, I've ridden there. You go up, you come down, and, you park in an artichoke patch. I mean, how do we put
Yeah.
on a world-class event there? And, oh, we'll figure it out. So, and oh, by the way, Martin Whiteley, the technical director for the UCI, is going to be visiting next week. Oh, is he? Yeah, and I'll come out. Can you pick us up at the airport and we'll go visit the venue? And I'm going, sure. If you're going to be out here, I'm your hired gun, fine.
Yeah.
Then the day the day before, I'm USA Cycling, the CEO of USA Cycling is supposed to arrive at San Francisco Airport at like 9 a.m., 10 a.m., whatever, noon, whatever. And he calls me up and says, I can't I can't show up now. You're on your own. I'm going like, you're kidding me. I'm on my own. And yeah, there's this guy, Martin. I haven't even met Martin Whiteley.
Oh
And
boy.
so, we figure it out. I pick Martin up and he goes, let's go to the venue. And I go, there's nothing there. And he goes, well, you got to take me. And I go like, dude, I don't know how we're going to put an event on there in 6 months. And it's going to be impossible. And
Yeah.
you could just see the smoke coming out of his ears. I mean, this is the UCI.
Right.
And
Wow.
this is like a blind date that I've been set up on.
Hmm.
And so we go to the venue and he says to me, we'd not met. He goes, Rick, you're the Sea Otter guy, right? I go, yeah, I'm the Sea Otter guy. He goes like, you're going to fix this, right? And I go, I guess I'm going to fix it. And, I take him right back to the airport and he takes off and he's just,
Right.
you could see, I mean, the blood was boiling.
Yeah.
And so then I start getting on the phone. I'd never been to Skyline Park. The highlights of the story are is that it goes from an artichoke patch that could have never hosted a World Cup that USAC bid for, fully knowing that they didn't have anything. They just used their reputation to get the opening round.
Yeah.
And I called up around, I called people I knew. They go, there's this park in Napa. It's close to San Francisco. So I got Napa approved as an area that the event from the UCI. I reserved Skyline Park without ever going there because I had to go within 3 weeks. My wife and I were
Oh,
on a
wow.
plane to a UCI meeting in Switzerland. I put together the entire bid package because we have to present it to all the teams and all the media. I put it together on the phone and on my credit card. I reserved like 200 rooms at the Napa Marriott Hotel. I wrote the entire bid package without ever being to the venue. And then when I got back and I bullshitted my way through the UCI meetings, and when we landed back in San Francisco, within 3 months, I had everything done, including, if you remember, we had closed down California Street in San Francisco to run
Oh,
the
I don't remember that.
California Street Hill Climb
Oh,
with
wow.
pro riders and local dignitaries. And we also put on a concert the night of the hill climb, which was Wednesday in San Francisco at Slim's at Boz Scaggs's venue. And we had a big party that night. It was just nutty what we were able to accomplish to pull that together. And it all worked out.
How wild. I mean, you think about that, your first interaction with the UCI and the fact that you didn't have a relationship, uh, probably worked in your favor because you could just be really matter of fact and not, you know, there's no relationship to worry about, right? It's more like, hey, this is never going to work. I don't know what this is not, you know.
No, it was
Maybe you don't
very,
say those things, you know, if there is a relationship there, or
no,
maybe
you
get to
don't.
it,
No,
but it's different.
because you create your own problems. I was in a fortunate position. To this day, I say exactly what you just said. It
Yeah.
was both the best and worst thing that happened to the sports marketing company. It was on day one, it was the worst. But
Yeah.
after we got through it, then, you know, USAC says, you want to run the national series? Do you want to run cyclocrosses? Do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? I get invited to the UCI Mountain Bike Commission. It really, um, if a negative can actually be a huge positive, it was that for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, look, I would like to touch on Enduro Bearings and your role in Enduro Bearings if you have a few minutes to discuss that. I know we talked about an hour and a half. We're right about there right now, but if you wouldn't mind, I mean, we had Matt Harvey on, the co-founder, a few weeks back. You helped facilitate that, and what a great interview, great guy. And I'd been to their facility, and it's just it's amazing, like I think, we're all in the industry and we're all really techie about certain things, but I, to go that granular with a bearing, that's not how most cyclists think, So, I mean, of course, you want your wheels to spin, but man, I got a real education from Matt, and while I was there, I just felt like I was, invited into something very special. And so, yeah, how did you first sync up with Matt?
Well, it was interesting. I had worked on a handlebar project, and I called Matt because we knew each other casually. And I asked him some advice on, you know, manufacturing and, kind of the traditional supply chain and markups and whatnot, because I was developing all the tooling and price points for the handlebars. And so I got to know him then, and then basically launched that company. I was a consultant, got it up and running, and knew that I thought I was going to tap out for good, and just retire and ride my bike. And then I saw him on a gravel ride in the Bay Area, my old haunting grounds, Redwood City, Woodside. And he said, hey, great job. You won Unbound with Ian Boswell, looks like you're doing really well with the project. And I go, yeah, but I'm tapping out. And he said, well, you want to help me? I've got this thing called the Max Hit, patent that I'm developing and bottom brackets and headsets. And that just grew. I really love Matt Harvey for what he is as a person and
Yeah.
what he represents in the industry, engineering first, product first guy, um, just honest as the day is long.
Yeah.
And I said, well, let's see if we can work together. I tend to steamroll through things a little bit. And our friendship is more important than working together.
Yeah.
And and I've been there ever since. And my role is basically Matt says something. I think he said it in your podcast. He's really good at designing things, and then he tries to keep them secret. So he brought me in to help tell the story, and
Yeah.
it's been fun. We've really, I think it's fair to say, we've rebranded and relaunched the company in the aftermarket. Huge
Hmm.
OEM success,
Yeah.
forever. And that's my role. And, we have a long way to go to actually continue to polish the apple on that, but we've accomplished a lot structurally, in terms of, especially globally, in terms of our distribution channel, and then just figuring out a way to reach people at that same level that we used to reach people with bouncy houses and goofy
Hmm.
ideas, to make sure they appreciate bearings for how important they are, and how what's behind the seal isn't the same from bearing company A to bearing company B.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so true. I mean, I have some very nice Cadex wheels on my bike. He pulled one of my bearings out and just ripped the whole bearing apart and started, going through it. And, he wasn't, devaluing the quality of the bearing. He said, this is right in line with what you see on wheels of this nature, and then he said, then he talked about the XD15 bearing, and it was a real education. And yeah, it's pretty amazing his whole story about growing up in Oakland and then now manufacturing and having his business in Oakland. I mean, there's just a lot to admire with Matt, and it's really cool that you guys have synced up and you've helped him. And I've seen it because I work, I'm an outside sales rep, so I'm in the shops, and I know there are a lot of shops now that are talking bearings. It is something that's easy to overlook until the bearing's completely shot. A lot of riders, don't realize the friction or what have you in the bottom bracket or maybe elsewhere in their bike, until it's really, basically the bearing's destroyed, and then, oh, I need to replace this. And
Well,
you know,
and one of the things that I think is most interesting that I've learned, because I didn't realize this, until I started working with Matt, is
mhm,
if we were to look at wheels, and I'm certainly not commenting on any brands, but the lightest hub isn't the best hub,
mhm,
um, because oftentimes the lightest hub will introduce, when you lace the wheel, it'll deform the hub, because when you
mhm,
tension the spokes, if the hub's too light, the integrity of the entire system, the wheel system, is compromised. That can introduce stresses to the bearing that actually create friction under load. And I think that the thing that I think that I would, in a simple way, putting a new bottom bracket in, or wheel bearings, and then just spinning the crank arm assembly on the bike stand, without any load on it,
mhm.
is not an indication of how efficient the drivetrain is. You
Right.
have to actually load the bearings. And if poor bearings spin really fast in the bike stand, it could be because they have light touch seals, they don't have proper engagement, they don't have proper grease fill. And as soon as you put them under load and you torque that bearing, it slows down immediately.
Yeah.
So I think that, the understanding of actually what goes into making a good bicycle bearing, because a hub bearing could also be in the blender on your kitchen
Yeah.
um, counter.
Yeah.
And the loads that bearing has to experience and the speeds that it runs even though it's the same size bearing, is completely different than the loads and the spin rates that you find in a bicycle. And the real key to enduro bearings is not just copying the blender bearing and putting a logo on the outside of it, but actually Matt has thought his way through optimizing every component of that bearing specifically for its application on the bicycle.
Yeah. Yeah, it's remarkable, and I work for Giant, but obviously I have a lot of conversations about bicycles throughout my day in all the shops. So I'm since meeting Matt and learning about the process and just the company in general, I've been asking shops about it, and we have these good discussions. And I'm surprised at how many shops are doing enduro bearings of some sorts.
Yeah.
I was the database of information to offer the bearings. It's like that's got to be an incredible database for
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know.
We have, I don't know, 1,200 SKUs. Now, sometimes there's good, better, best of a particular size. So that sort of is a multiplier for how many SKUs we have.
Yeah,
But, the one thing that does happen in the industry is the database isn't very accurate like it is in the automotive industry.
yeah,
And it's very, because Matt just digs it. Um, he'll get a product manager, especially with a suspension bearing, that says, "Hey, can I get a bearing with this flange built into the inner race?" And Matt will do it because we make our own stuff, right? And
yeah,
so part of the challenge we have as a company is, I think we cover about 98% of the the various bearing applications going back, 50 years, where
yeah,
some bearing companies or component companies, focus on a much narrower band of product. We're the guys that have almost everything.
yeah.
And so it's crazy. And people often ask me, this is interesting to me anyways.
Hmm.
Hey, why can't I just go and type in the year, the make and the model of my bike, and up pops the database of all the bearings that are in that bike, so I know what to order.
Yeah.
Um,
Boy, wouldn't that be nice?
yeah, dirty, incomplete data. Because I
Yeah,
tell you, without naming brands, some brands make mid-season changes, and they
yeah,
never update their website or database.
yeah.
And you could go on and look at your owner's manual and think you have a particular set of hub bearings, and they've changed the wheel set mid-season that's on that bike, and that's not what's in the bike.
Right,
So yeah, pretty
right.
crazy. Yeah.
I think too, like just in general, like having a build of materials list. Like if there was some kind of database, but again, it gets back to the data. But man, sometimes it's so hard. It's like a research project trying to, wrangle the little piece, and how many man hours are wasted on just trying to locate something that's, should be public. It's just not for whatever reason, and becomes very challenging to
Yeah.
locate, So, but yeah, well, okay, listen, Rick, man, uh, I feel like we could talk all day. I said the same thing to Matt. Those guys, those of us that have been in the industry a long time, and man, with the Sea Otter, all the years of enjoyment I've personally had, my family, the 1 year with the sideways rain, notwithstanding, my son still goes to Sea Otter, loves Sea Otter, so we didn't ruin him. But man, so many memories. I'm sure we could. You might even be able to have a podcast just on Sea Otter alone, right? All the different stories and, oh my gosh, yeah. But really appreciate you taking the time and joining us today, and appreciate your help in getting Matt on the podcast. Yeah,
Oh, sure. My
yeah,
pleasure. And it's been fun. I
yeah.
don't talk about this stuff very much. And so this has been a hell of a good bench racing session. Yeah. So I've really
Nice.
enjoyed it. So
Well,
thank
I'm
you.
glad. I'm glad you enjoyed it, and yeah, maybe we'll have you back on for another round. We'll see. But yeah, thanks everybody out there for listening, and that's going to do it for this week's episode.